Hello, and welcome to Day by Day True Crime Stories, the podcast where we explore a different crime or justice milestone from this day in history. I'm your host, Kona Gallagher, and today is September 19th. On this day in 1827, a duel meant to settle a gentleman's dispute on a Mississippi River sandbar erupted into one of the wildest brawls in frontier lore. It became a free-for-all that left 2 men dead, many wounded, and etched one name into legend: Jim Bowie. Today, we're talking about the Vidalia Sandbar Duel and Brawl. Let's get started. By the late 1820s, along the river country between Vidalia, Louisiana, and Natchez, Mississippi, reputation was hard currency. Political rivalries, unpaid notes, and old beefs simmered, especially among the Wells and Cuny families and their rivals. Out of that stew came a formal challenge. Samuel Levy Wells III and Dr. Thomas H. Maddox of Alexandria would meet on neutral ground, a broad sandbar mid-river where anti-dueling laws were harder to enforce. Each principal arrived with his entourage: seconds, surgeons, and armed friends. Jim Bowie was not one of the duelists, but he stood with the Wells party as a supporter. The Maddox side included Major Norris Wright, Colonel Robert A. Crane, and the Blanchard brothers, among others. The stage was set for ritual, yet beneath all of the politeness, it was prime for trouble. The rules were standard: 10 or so paces, matched pistols, and the seconds to give the word. Wells and Maddox fired and missed. They reloaded and fired again and missed again. Now, by custom, this actually means that it's over. The honor is satisfied and everybody shakes hands. And so on paper, this matter was over. But in reality, the decades of pride and grudges were anything but satisfied. Now, everything about the duel itself had gone by the book. The seconds measured the ground, the doctors stood back with their cases, and the onlookers formed a ragged semicircle in the sand. There were 2 clean exchanges, 2 clean misses, and an agreement that the affair should end. It all went exactly how it was supposed to go, and honestly, nobody got hurt, so it was the best case scenario. And that makes what came next even crazier, because the bloodletting started not during the formal contest, but after it, when supporters from both camps drifted closer, trading looks and words. Courtesy gave way to taunts, and hands slipped to pocket pistols and cane swords. The duel ended like a tea ceremony, and then the brawl began like a thunderclap. Now, witness accounts diverge, of course, but everyone agrees on how it started. As the parties separated, temper snapped. General Samuel Cooney addressed Colonel Robert A. Crane, urging that Maddox and his side should, quote, return to the ground and settle it, end quote, though Wells had already declared himself satisfied. Crane, armed and ready, didn't wait. He fired. Now, accounts differ as to whether he fired at Cuny first or directly at Bowie, but he struck Jim Bowie in the hip. Either way, Bowie took that personally. Major Norris Wright surged forward with a sword cane and drove at Bowie. The blade reportedly glanced off of his sternum, and the 2 grappled chest to chest. Bowie then drew his long sheath knife and fatally stabbed Wright. Shots cracked from both sides. Alfred and Carrie Blanchard fired and slashed. Jefferson Wells answered with pistol fire. Dr. Denny, the surgeon, was hit in his thigh and hand while trying to help. In perhaps 90 seconds or so, some say maybe a few minutes, the sand was red with blood. General Cooney lay mortally wounded by a shot to the chest. Major Wright was dead. Bowie had been shot, beaten over the head with the butt of a pistol, stabbed, and cut. Yet he was still standing, still swinging, and still fighting his way out with that knife. Then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. Friends dragged the living from the sandbar. Boats pushed off into the current. The duel that killed no one had become a melee that had killed 2 and made a legend. What followed was a tangle of letters, accusations, and hearings. Eyewitnesses couldn't agree on the sequence of events. Some swore that Crane fired first at General Cooney, missing and then hitting Bowie. But others insisted that Bowie was already drawing when Crane shot. Accounts of Wright's death varied. Some said it was a knife to the chest or a poorly timed stroke. Even the number of shots and who wounded whom were disputed. 5 days after the fight, on September 24th, Samuel L. Wells III publicly accused Crane of premeditated murder. Crane replied on October 3rd, claiming self-defense and arguing that Bowie was drawing on him. He said Cooney drew first or made a deadly threat and that Bowie lied. A grand jury in Natchez met, heard the chaos, and returned no indictments. In a world where dueling was technically illegal but widely practiced, and where the men involved were powerful, the law found no single story that it could prove. Within a month, Wells himself died of fever. The rest carried scars and stories, but none carried a conviction. Kind of like me. The sandbar fight nearly killed Jim Bowie. He took a bullet to the hip, a stab to the chest that glanced off bone, deep cuts, and a concussion from that pistol whipping. His recovery took months, but it also minted his legendary status. Bowie had carried a big knife before that day, but afterward, the Bowie knife became iconic. Smiths across the South began forging large clip-point blades with guards and vicious balance. Quote, a knife like Bowie's, end quote. Within a few years, newspapers began referencing Bowie knives without explanation. The design crossed oceans and the name needed no footnote. Word of the fight spread through the region with letters and papers savoring the drama. The duel without blood, the brawl with plenty, and the wounded man who wouldn't go down. Bowie's reputation for iron will and cold steel followed him to Texas through land schemes and skirmishes all the way to the Alamo in 1836. By then, the sandbar fight was more than a brawl. It was an origin story. The Vidalia Sandbar fight began as a ritual to tame violence and ended as proof that rituals can't always restrain men with grudges and guns. 2 died, several were maimed, and Jim Bowie's name stepped from man into myth. Thank you for joining me on today's episode of Day by Day True Crime Stories. If you found this episode compelling, please subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. It'll help us grow. And be sure to join me again tomorrow as we explore another significant event in true crime history. Until then, stay safe and remember that behind every headline is a life worth remembering. Day by Day True Crime Stories is a Little Monster production.
Hey, you can do it!